Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Using Sensitive Collections for Your Research. This is the fourth and final in the series presented by the Museums of History New South Wales and the State Library of New South Wales. My name is Renee and I'm your host for this session. Today I will introduce you to our presenters, Rhonda from the Museums of History New South Wales and Bronwyn from the State Library of New South Wales. The Museums of History New South Wales and the State Library of New South Wales acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and waters across New South Wales. We pay our respect to Aboriginal elders past and present and extend that respect to other First Nations people joining us today. I will now hand over to Rhonda from the Museums of History New South Wales. Thanks, Rhonda.
Thank you, Renee, and good morning. I would like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the lands of the Darug people in Western Sydney. In this webinar, I will be talking about records in the Museums of History New South Wales State Archive collection relating to childcare and protection and patient records for infirm and destitute asylums and mental health facilities. These types of records contain different types of personal information which could be considered sensitive for one reason or another. This could include details about a person's social condition, health and medical information, information about children in care, and about a person's family background. The records can provide a real insight into an individual's personal story. Before we look at some examples, be aware that personal details in the records may be distressing. I should also mention that during the webinar, you will see terms such as lunatic asylum, mental hospital, and hospital for the insane. These are terms which were used both in the records and in our finding aids. While they are not terms we would use today, they were the terms used when the records were created. To begin with, I'd like to just show you quickly how to search records in our collection. So our website, mhnsw.au, if you scroll halfway down, you'll come to the State Archives collection tile, and then on that you'll see Discover More. You click on that. That's going to take you to this page. Now, there are some ways you can find out what records we hold. The main way is the State Archives catalogue. So that's search the collection. I've got circled there. You can use this to search by subject, a name, or a place. And this will search across everything that is available in our catalogue, including the indexes. Just above to the left there, you'll see subjects A to Z. This brings together guides, indexes, and webinars on a research topic in one place. And it's a really good way to get an overview of a particular research topic. We've also there got, I've circled Ask an Archivist, and that's our online inquiry service where you can contact us for advice and guidance. So using subjects A to Z, I would go to the letter C, and that would take me down to childcare and protection. So you can see there we have guides, indexes, and webinars available. The main guide is the Childcare and Protection Guide, and that details the major sources from our collection relating to childcare and protection in the 19th and 20th century. Importantly, with these records, there are access conditions. So all requests for fostering, adoption, and state ward records that are closed to public access should be directed to Family and Community Services. And information about this can be found on the Department of Communities and Justice website, and there is a link in our guide to get you to that website. So in this webinar, we'll see an example of a record which is open to public access. Childcare and protection started quite early in New South Wales. 1801, the female orphan school is established. Then in 1819, the male orphan school. Then these two orphan schools in 1850 became the Protestant orphan school, and we also had the Roman Catholic orphan school. Then in the second part of the 19th century, we start to see these other institutions like the Randwick Asylum for Destitute Children, the industrial schools, the nautical training schools, which were the ships, the Vernon and Sabron, the Shaftesbury Reformatory for Girls, and the Farm Home for Boys at Mittagong. Now, with the exception of the Reformatory for Girls, those records have been included in our Childcare and Protection Index 1817 to 1942, which you can access on our website. 1881, the State Children's Relief Act established a boarding out system for children in care, and the State Children's Relief Board was established, and we'll have a look at an example of a record of that quite soon. 1923, the Child Welfare Act was passed, and that is when formal adoption became possible in New South Wales. Now, a number of the records, particularly the early ones and the Randwick Asylum for Destitute Children, have been indexed and digitised and made available on Ancestry. Now, Ancestry is freely available to access in our reading room. Looking at the indexes we have available, so we have the main Childcare and Protection Index, 1817 to 1942, which indexes a number of those records that I just mentioned. And then we have the Dependents Children's Registers from 1883 to 1923. Now, these are the surviving records of the State Children's Relief Board. So as well as the index, these records have been digitised, so you can go from the index entry to the digitised record on our website. And we're going to have a look at an example of that right now. So in the index, I searched for Ivy Bills. So this is the entry you will get when you get that search result. It gives a few details, the mother's name, the father's name, and also the details about the guardian and foster parents. So if I had to click on the details tab there, that's going to take me to a fuller version of that index entry, but also to the PDF link that'll take me to the digitized version of that record. So this is what you'll get. So that is the full register entry there. Now, what you can do in the top right-hand corner, you can either download that and keep a copy, or you can print a copy of that record from our website. So now taking a closer look at what information these registers give about a child in the care of the State Child Relief Board. So we can see we've got Ivy's name, we've got her age, when she was admitted in January of 1893, and where she came from. And that would be the Benevolent Asylum, and Bronwyn is going to talk about the Benevolent Society of New South Wales in her presentation. We get Ivy's father's name, George Bills, and he's a carpenter at Mudgee. Then there's a notation, the child left by mother Elizabeth Bills with a Mrs. Saunders. Then below that, we get the particulars of her foster parents or guardians while Ivy was in the care of the board. So it gives the names and addresses, the date she went to a particular foster parent or guardian, and the date that she came back, perhaps to the depot or was transferred to another foster parent or guardian, and how she was placed, whether a boarder or adopted. So in that N column, we can see that the first word there is boarder. So Ivy was placed as a boarder. Now, the annotations in red ink there, they most likely refer to other records that were created by the board at the time. However, unfortunately, these registers are the only surviving records. So those annotations don't lead you to other records in our collection. However, sometimes there might be an annotation that does lead you to another record. So up the top there, you see I've got circled in red, ColSec order. So that's a little hint for me to perhaps look at the Colonial Secretary's correspondence to see if I can find any record about what that refers to. And we will have a look to see where that does lead us. But just looking at the bottom of the card here, this is the entry for the records of payment of maintenance. Now, the family were asked to contribute to the maintenance of child if they could. Now, in many cases, the family couldn't provide any financial support for the children, and in many cases, the children being in the care of the board were orphans. However, we can see from this record that Ivy's parents or her family, it may not have been her parents, it could have been other family members, have made some payments towards her maintenance while she was in the care of the board. At the very bottom is how they were disposed of. Now, that's a terrible phrase, I know, but what it means is what happened to the child when they left the care of the board. Now, sometimes they could have been adopted. They might have gone back to the custody of one or both parents or to a family member, or the child may have attained the age of 18 and they were discharged at that point. So we can see that the date here is 1906, 1907. So we know that Ivy's 5 years old in 1893. So by this time, Ivy would have been 18 years of age. So she would have been discharged from the care of the board at the age of 18. Now, moving back to that annotation, ColSec order. So the Colonial Secretary's office acted as a channel of between really everybody in New South Wales, between the governor, government officers, police, magistrates, courthouses, and the general population. It's a very, very useful resource. So we have 2 indexes available on our website to the Colonial Secretary's correspondence. Down the bottom, the very early one, 1788 to 1825. That has also been digitised, and you can go from the index entry to the digital papers on our website. That is also available on Ancestry. The later index up the top there, 1826 to 1896. So this is the time period where I've had to do a search to see if I could find any letter relating to young Ivy Bills. Then I put her name into the search box and there was a search result, and we can clearly see that this is the Ivy Bills that we were looking for. It has benevolent asylum, aged 5. So I've circled there, and that's the letter number. So the first number, 92, is the year that the letter was written. So that's 1892, and the 15884 is the letter number. Going on from that, a fuller version of that index entry. Now, most of these letters actually haven't been digitised, so they're not available on our website. There are a few that have been put up, but the majority haven't been digitised. So what you could do if you found a letter in this index, there are 2 options. You could order the red arrow up there. You could order a copy on our online copy service by hitting on that black shopping cart. Or if you wanted to come to our reading room to view that record, you could hit on the clipboard and pre-order that record before your visit. However, to order records and look at records in our reading room, you will need a reader's ticket, and that can be applied for on our website as well. So I have copied this letter so we can have a look at it. Very good handwriting, which is always a bonus. So this letter was written from the courthouse at Redfern to the Colonial Secretary, recommending that Ivy Bills be admitted to the benevolent asylum. So this letter provides a lot of detail about the circumstances for why they were recommending that Ivy be admitted to the benevolent asylum. So I'll just briefly tell you what's in the letter. So it appears that Ivy's mother, Elizabeth Bills, left Ivy with Mrs. Mary Saunders to go to Mudgee to see her husband who was in hospital there. And Ivy's mother had promised to pay Mrs. Saunders for looking after Ivy if she was away for longer than a month. Now, that promise wasn't kept. Mrs. Saunders went to the courthouse and a summons was issued against Ivy's mother for desertion. Ivy's mother didn't come back to appear in court to answer the summons. What she did do, though, is she eventually wrote a letter to instruct Mrs. Saunders to take Ivy to the mail train leaving Sydney, and that the boy in charge of the sleeping car would take her to Mudgee. However, when Mrs. Saunders took Ivy to the station, the man in charge knew nothing of these arrangements and refused to take care of young Ivy. Mrs. Saunders states in the letter she's got 5 children of her own, her husband's unemployed, she doesn't have the means to look after Ivy for any longer period of time. So with that, the Colonial Secretary has then recommended that Ivy be placed in the benevolent asylum, and then, of course, she is put into the care of the State Children's Relief Board. And she remains in their care until the age of 18, as we've seen. So this letter, we were very fortunate to find it, just gives you all that added detail as to why Ivy ended up in the care of the State Children's Relief Board. So I do hope that after all of this, Ivy did go on to live a very long and happy life. So as I said, those registers are indexed and digitised on our website, so very easy for people to access if they wanted to have a look at those. Now looking at the patient records we hold for government asylums for the infirm and destitute. So the government care for the infirm and destitute did begin early in 1812 with the establishment of the Rum Hospital. However, primarily before 1862, care for the infirm and destitute was provided by non-government organisations. It wasn't until 1862 when the government established a government asylums for the infirm and destitute branch within the Colonial Secretary's department that the government did start to assume responsibility for the care. So then we see these other asylums being established, Hyde Park, Liverpool and Rookwood. With the exception of Hyde Park, we do hold records that were created by these asylums. However, the records do vary for each asylum. Again, with these records, there are access conditions. Now, this access condition applies to patient records for infirm and destitute asylums and for patient records for mental health facilities. So records more than 110 years old are open to public access. Records that are less than 110 years old are closed to public access. And if you wanted to look at those records, you do need to get a letter of permission from the relevant health authority before you can access those records. And we have an online guide, Accessing Patient Identifying Records, that gives you all the details about how you go to get that permission. Again, I would say, as always, a good place to start is our guides. So we have the Infirm and Destitute Asylum Guide, and we also have a separate guide for the Liverpool State Hospital and Home, and I'll talk about those records very shortly. So the typical records that you're going to find are registers, admission cards, and clinical notes, but only for LIDCOM. But I will say that few records have survived for these type of institutions, and the surviving information on these records can be very limited, just the name of the patient and the date of admission or discharge. We do have one general register of inmates, which covers from 1880 to 1896. This is indexed on our website, and it's also been indexed and digitised on Ancestry. We don't have the digitised copy on our website, but we do have that information on microfilm if you're coming into our reading room to look at that. Again, as always, I would always suggest checking the Colonial Secretary's papers and those two indexes. Now, although patient records for the asylums are restricted for 110 years, the Liverpool asylum records are open to public access. So these particular records had been in the custody of the City of Liverpool and District Historical Society when the hospital closed. They were given to the Historical Society. So in the year 2000, the Historical Society kindly return those records to the Museum of History New South Wales. Now, the open to public access direction is by arrangement with the Department of Health. And you can look at the guide to see what records we do hold for the Liverpool Asylum. Now, we are progressively digitising a particular series of records from the Liverpool State Home, and they are the admission cards from 1891 to 1932. So these are admission cards for patients who were discharged from the hospital during that time period. So currently 27 of the 41 boxes have been digitised, and those are available on our website, and the rest will be completed in the coming months. Now, these records don't have a standalone index, so this is where you do have to use our State Archives catalogue search to search these records. So you can see up the top there, I've conducted a search for a John Chesworth. Now, this is searching across the entire catalogue, remember? So we are going to get search results for persons by the name of John Chesworth in many, many series there. You can see probates there and primary applications. However, you can narrow down your search. You can see just down the right-hand side, tweak my results. I can just single out, I only want to look at John Chesworth, who was in the Liverpool State Home. So I would click on that, and that's going to take me to that particular entry, and you can see that there's a digitised image. Now, there are two sides to these cards, the front and the back, so you'll get two cards there. We'll just have a closer look at what information we get on that card. Now, this is actually a very, very good card. It provides a lot of information about John, his age, his occupation, his birthplace, which we can see is Liverpool, England. We also get the name of the ship that he arrived on, and that he's been 53 years in New South Wales. We get details about his parents and also details about his wife, and then a list of his children and their address. So that gives you a lot of information about John there. On the reverse side of the card is where you get the admission and discharge dates from that particular asylum. And also there is a column that gives you a reason why they were in the asylum. However, just to manage expectations, many times you are going to get a card like this. So you can see there's not a lot of detail provided about Bert Flood, just his age, his occupation and his birthplace. And then on the reverse side, his date of admission and discharge. So these cards are typical of the layouts of the cards you'll find for all the asylums in terms of the information that can be provided about a patient, but in many cases, all those details aren't going to be filled in. So that's the important thing to remember about these asylum records. Very limited information, and also the record series are very, very incomplete. However, as I said, that particular series will soon be completely digitised and available on our website. The other records, you would come into our reading room to view those. Now, moving on to look at the 19th and 20th century mental health facilities and the patient records we hold. So the care of the mentally ill in New South Wales commenced in 1811 at Castle Hill, and it was a building there that was referred to as a lunatic asylum. And then this is the list of the key mental health facilities that were operating in New South Wales in the 19th and 20th century. And with the exception of those two very early asylums, we do hold records that were created by these individual mental health facilities. Again, I would suggest, as always, look at the guides to see what records we hold and how you search those records. And then most importantly, there is the guide for accessing the patient identifying records, which will give you all the information to obtain access to look at the records. So the typical records that you would find would be indexes, admissions and discharge registers, registers of discharge, removal and deaths, case papers, admission files, and medical case books. However, not all of these categories of records have survived for every mental health facility. We do hold some general indexes, which is always a good way to get into these records if you're not sure of what mental health facility a person might have been in. We have the male and female admission registers, which go from 1852 to 1916. And then that admission cards 1910 to 1949, which is for the reception houses at Darlinghurst, Newcastle and Orange. So reception houses were more of an observation ward. Patients were assessed, and if necessary, they were then transferred on to another mental health facility from that time. So that's another good way you can get into the records if you're not sure of the facility a person was in. As always, I would always say the Colonial Secretary's correspondence, particularly obviously for the 19th century. So to show you an example of a patient record, I'm actually going to follow my own advice, and I have used the Colonial Secretary's Index as an entry point for locating a patient being admitted to Gladesville Hospital. So for this example, I searched the index for Adeline Bowers, and as we can see, there are two index entries there, one in 1893, that would be her admission, and then sadly in 1896, there's a record about her death at Gladesville Asylum. So I have copied these letters so we could have a look at them. So the first one is a statement of admission to Gladesville Hospital. So this is basically her admission paper to Gladesville Hospital. So Adeline was admitted on the 16th of August, 1893. So that middle page that you see there is the page by the person requesting that Adeline be admitted to Gladesville Hospital. So it seems that Adeline had been living at a boarding house in North Sydney, and it's the boarding house keeper, Mrs. Hewitt, who is requesting that Adeline be admitted to Gladesville Hospital. That last page just on the right there, that provides all the personal details about Adeline. Her age, she's 34, she's a widow, she has 5 children, and her youngest child is 5 years old. It details, they refer to it as an attack. So this is her first attack. She's been like this for 4 months. And it does note, and this is what is written here, the cause of insanity, and it's listed as trouble. It also, on this page, lists her nearest relations, and it lists her 2 daughters, Ethel and Nellie. The next part of this admission document are 2 medical certificates signed by 2 different medical practitioners. So they had to have 2 medical certificates by 2 different medical practitioners. So these just detail the medical practitioners' observations of Adeline's behaviour, and why her behaviour has made them agree that she should be admitted to Gladesville Hospital. And then the last page is just the final statement of admission, and that's signed by the medical superintendent of Gladesville Hospital. So that gives you quite a lot of detail around the circumstances as to why Adeline is being admitted to Gladesville, and also quite a bit of detail about her personal circumstances as well. Now, as I said, the other index entry was the notice of Adeline's death at Gladesville in 1896. So she was in the hospital for 3 years. Now, it does list the cause of death, and it's listed as septicemia. And there is a notation, and I'll just read what that notation has said. It said, in this case, a coroner's inquest was held because the septicemia resulted from a superficial bite wound on the arm inflicted by a fellow patient. So that's just a reminder that sometimes the details that you will get in these types of records can be upsetting and distressing, and unfortunately for Adeline, it is a bit of a tragic ending to her story. Looking at some other records we had for Adeline and what other records you could find for patients in mental health facilities, this is an example of a medical casebook. So this is the entry for Adeline Bowers. So a medical casebook, it contains notes, and they're made at very irregular intervals on a patient's behaviour and condition while they were a patient in the hospital. So it's either the nurse or the doctor going around just making notes on any particular day that they decide to do that, about her physical condition and also her behaviour. And it just provides a very abbreviated version of her personal details up the top there. And the further history is just an abbreviated version of those medical certificates. And then again, sadly, we can see the last entry is just recording that she did die there in 1896. The last record I would like to show you is the Register of Discharges, Removals and Deaths. And this is arranged by the date of discharge or the date that they might have been transferred to another mental health facility, or the date that they died. So in this entry, it's Adeline's entry and records her date of death. But what it does also give is the date of admission and the register number in an admission register. And it gives her cause of death as well. But just in the end column there, and I've just made that a bit enlarged, it does note that she was buried by friends. So in the end of that tragic story for Adeline, I guess it was nice to know that she was buried by her friends at the end there. So that's just a very quick look at the types of patient records that you could get for patients who were in mental health facilities. And just to conclude, just a few clues as to how you might find out if a family member or an ancestor, was in an infirm and destitute asylum or a mental health facility. Family stories often give you clues. Death certificates record where a person has died, so it may say Liverpool Asylum or Callan Park Hospital. Newspaper accounts, particularly police and government gazettes, which you could find on Trove. So I've just got two examples there, one from the Government Gazette, and so that's a notice of an intestate estate of Joe Gowlis, and it does state that he's late of Gladesville Asylum, and that's dated 1900, so that gives a date to work with. To the right-hand side there, that's a notice in a government police gazette, under missing friends. So it appears in 1897, George Allen's mother had posted a notice looking for information on his whereabouts. And it does state in this that he was an inmate of Callan Park for 3 years and discharged 12 months ago. So again, gives you dates to work with to get into these records. And just at the top there, that's actually an entry from our dependent children's register. And this is for Illabella Gadsden. Her father is dead, but it does note that her mother is in Gladesville Hospital. So that just leads you to another record about Isabella's mother. Again, of course, important to remember these records, the access conditions, and if you will require a letter of permission before you can look at these records. And that does even include indexes that do go into the restricted time period. As always, you could contact us on Ask an Archivist for advice and in guidance into researching these records. So that's the end of my presentation. So thank you for listening. So I'm going to hand you over to Bronwyn now, who's going to talk about sensitive records in the New South Wales State Library. So thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Rhonda. That was a really informative overview. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from the Gadigal land. So here at the State Library of New South Wales, what do we collect? We collect the personal papers of individuals, families, and the archives of private organisations and businesses from New South Wales. The library has 115 collections designated as sensitive. There are millions of items in our collections, including manuscripts, books, pictures, newspapers, subscription databases, and much more. So why would you use sensitive collections? Family history research involves delving into the past to uncover information about your ancestors. Sensitive records such as birth, death, and marriage certificates can provide essential genealogical details with names, dates, and locations, forming the backbone of a family tree. Records related to sensitive topics like a child born to an unwed mother or adoption can shed light on the social context in which your ancestors lived. If you are a care leaver, you may be looking for information about yourself. Sensitive medical information found in private organisations' collections may provide insights into the health history of your ancestors. And lastly, information found in sensitive records can lead to connections with living relatives who share a common ancestry. So today I'm going to provide an overview of some of our key resources in the following sensitive collections. So I'm not going to look at every single aspect of these collections, but we'll just look at some of the key ones. So we'll be looking at the Benevolent Society of New South Wales, St Margaret's Hospital, Darlinghurst, the Dr John Mackey Memorial Home for Children, the Dreadnought Association, and the Big Brother movement. It's important to note that the collections we have in the State Library of New South Wales are mostly for defunct organisations or services that no longer operate. Also, what we do hold is not comprehensive. So, as Rhonda has mentioned, some of our records also may include information that is distressing, and the language used can be offensive. It's not language we would use today. Also, the preferred term care leavers is for all individuals who experienced institutional or out-of-home care as children or young people. The term care leavers is widely used by federal and state government departments and researchers in Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Canada, and the USA. On the right-hand side of the screen, there's information about Find and Connect. It's a web resource that brings together historical resources relating to institutional care in Australia. It includes a lot of information, and it also includes the available records and where those records are held. So we're going to start with a look at the Benevolent Society records. The Benevolent Society of New South Wales, spanning from 1813 through 1995, came to the State Library in two consignments. The first in 1963. Between 1992 through 1996, the library received further consignments of records that encompass those years up to 95. The information in the records highlight the difficult and challenging social environment faced by people in the 19th and early 20th century Sydney. During this period marked by significant social and economic changes, and to quote author Tanya Evans, we see many families who have fallen on hard times because of drink, unwanted pregnancy, violence, unemployment, or plain bad luck. There was a lack of government social welfare support as we know it today, and relief efforts were primarily led by charitable organisations, religious institutions, and community groups. The Benevolent Society, founded in 1813 as Australia's first charity, aimed to provide assistance to individuals and families in need. The extensive collection also includes the records from the predecessor, the New South Wales Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge and Benevolence. Also note, the records that we have for the Benevolent Society have different levels of restrictions. Generally, the more recent records, the Society will actually undertake the search for you. You do need to approach them. And some of the records, generally the older ones, you do need a letter of permission, but you will do the searches yourself. The collection features minute books, indexes, registers of admissions and discharges, ledgers, journals, correspondence, and subject files. Surviving records encompass the Benevolent Asylum, the Thomas Street Asylum, Renwick Hospital for Infants, Scarborough House for Children, and the Royal Hospital for Women. So permission from the Society is required, with granted access valid for 10 years. And fees do apply, and you do need to contact the Society. However, before you get that permission, which has a small cost, it is a good idea to speak with the librarian. We will check your references and we'll investigate that the dates and the information you are after is covered in the records. Also, consult with library staff to understand our policies and procedures regarding access. This map of Sydney in 1858 shows the location of the Benevolent Asylum. The asylum was opened in 1821 by Governor Macquarie. It issued poor relief and took in the aged, infirm, blind and destitute, but its main focus was pregnant women and children. The Benevolent Asylum served as a place of industry and asylum. The prevailing attitudes of these times was of deserving poor and undeserving poor. And to ensure that people were deserving, Benevolent Society staff would visit and interview people before they were provided with outdoor relief or permitted admission to the asylum. So this building was closed in 1901 when the land was resumed by the government to build Central Station. Many of the early records of Scarborough House for Children and the Renwick Hospital for Infants were destroyed or lost as a result of flood. I'm now going to run through some of the key collections. So as I said, not everything, but some of the key collections. Firstly, the Renwick Hospital for Infants. The information recorded in the Register of Baptisms, for example, for Renwick Hospital for Infants, shows the date of baptism, name of child, name of mother, the minister who performed the baptism and religion. The matron's diaries for Renwick Hospital for Infants record the daily administration of the hospital and includes patient and staff matters. Scarborough Welfare House for Children at Bondi provided short-term accommodation for approximately 30,000 to 40,000 children between 1917 through 1986. Scarborough House originally accommodated women and children previously cared for at the Thomas Street Asylum. Few records were kept at Scarborough House prior to 1965. Between 1920 through 1960, there are no records, and although Matron Chapman reported numbers of children accommodated annually, there's no historical records other than what is documented in annual reports. The records go up to 1986. So individuals whose information is in the records could well be alive. And that is one of the reasons why obviously they're sensitive and there's restrictions upon access. The obstetrics journals contain the form for admission of waiting patients. Some of the details are the name of the applicant, marital status, occupation, address, and the name and occupation of husband. So a popular reason for people using the Society records is to search for the putative birth father. This describes when the father is not named on the original birth certificate or cannot be presumed to be the father under law. The father may have been involved at the time of the child's birth and named in the file. The majority of fathers are putative birth fathers. So as you can see, if you're building your family history, there's a lot of really valuable information in these records to help you flesh out who your ancestors were and to build a picture of how they lived. So how do you know if your ancestor was in the Benevolent Asylum? There is an online index of admissions and discharges for the period 1857 through 1900. This online index is the dedicated work of two people, Heather Garnsey and Martin Killian. So sometimes a family history researcher has a birth certificate of their relative, which has the place of birth as the benevolent asylum, and will have the address of the informant, usually the mother, as the benevolent asylum. Admission and discharge details can vary and may include name, age, religion, date of admission and discharge, and how they were discharged, whether it's to a boarding out officer, to family, to another institution, to a billet, whether they had permission, whether they absconded, were expelled, or whether they passed away. Inmates journal. So there's no online index to inmates journals, so you do need to know the date of admission or discharge, or at least of birth, to find the person you're looking for. If you can find your ancestor, the historical details in the inmates journals can be a goldmine. So to get started with the Benevolent Society records, use our library catalogue, and you'll find all the information you need within the catalogue, and it gives you information on how to go about getting permission, and it just steps you through it. Also, use the Guide to the Records of the Benevolent Society of New South Wales in the Mitchell Library. So you can access this book in the Mitchell Library. So next we'll look at St Margaret's. St Margaret's Hospital collections were presented to the library by the Sisters of St Joseph in 1999. The primary aim of the hospital was to provide obstetric services to unwed and destitute women. It was also an adoption agency. The hospital, which grew to occupy 4 terrace houses by 1898, continued in Surrey Hills until 1909. During this period, the hospital began training other women in midwifery and infant care and expanded to open an outpatients clinic. From 1910, the hospital continued in Burke Street, Darlinghurst. The work of the maternity hospital and midwifery training was continued from this base until 1998. Specialist services and training courses were added, including obstetric, gynecology, training of doctors. St Margaret's Public Hospital closed in 1993, followed by the closure of the private hospital in 1998. The records we hold are for the Catholic section of the hospital only, not the public section or the private hospital. These are available by the Records Office of Prince of Wales Hospital and St Vincent's. So here is a list of some of the key records in this collection. And here's the same list. And what I've done is expanded it to show you the type of details that are in the records. Once again, I'm not going to talk through everything. The baby books and the patient admission books being some of the most popular. And just a note about the baby books dated 1954 through 1966. We do get a lot of inquiries from people doing their horoscopes. And no, they do not include the time of birth. They do include surname of mother, gender of the child, date of birth, weight, length and head measurements of the child, and the doctor. The library has the patient's admission books 1910 through 1950, and after this time, they're located at the Royal Women's Hospital. So this collection does require written authority from the Sisters of St Joseph prior to access. All the contact information is in the catalogue records, so that'll tell you how to contact the sisters and get that permission. So next, we will look at the Dr. Dill Mackie Memorial Home for Children. The records of the Dr. Dill Mackie Memorial Home for Children were presented to the library in 1983 by the trustees. The Home for Children in Auburn was established by the Australian Protestant Orphan Society in 1917. Dr. Dill Mackie was the founder of the society. He was known as a bit of a firebrand, and he was very anti-Catholic. And so that was his motivation to start a home for Protestant children to ensure they weren't raised in Catholic institutions and converted to the Catholic faith. The Auburn home operated under a licence from the State Children's Relief Department, until 1920, allowing it to care for up to 10 infants. By 1922, it housed over 50 children. The home received financial support from the state government for each orphan in its care. The financial assistance was part of a broader initiative extended to various private institutions responsible for children. The Auburn home operated until its closure in 1982. A second Dilmaki home was established in a large house on a 2-acre property in Albert Road, Strathfield, in 1922. It housed up to 150 children at one time. The Strathfield home was intended to take some of the children from the Auburn home and provide space for a further 150. It closed in 1983. So the next two collections we will look at involve schemes to bring out young people to train and work as farmers in New South Wales. The best known being the Dreadnought Scheme, founded in 1909, and the Big Brother Movement, which was founded in 1925. The library holds collections from both the Dreadnought Association and the Big Brother Movement. The records of the Dreadnought Association were presented to the library in 1998 by the president of the Dreadnought Association. The Dreadnought Association was formed in the 1970s by former Dreadnought boys, and the records relate to child migration and to the government agriculture farm at Skyville. The beginnings of the Dreadnought Scheme came about when, fearing that Australia might be attacked by German U-boats or similar, a group of people in Sydney held a meeting at the town hall to decide to do something about it, with the aim of buying a Dreadnought-class battleship. A public appeal raised a lot of money, but not enough to buy a battleship. Around 1910, the Australian government decided to set up the Australian Navy, so that money raised was irrelevant. The majority of the funds were then used to start the Dreadnought Scheme to bring worthy British boys to Australia to train as farmers. And so they became known as the Dreadnought Boys. There is a restriction on this collection as well, obviously because of the sensitivity around the material in it. Between 1911 and 1939, 7,500 teenage boys migrated to Australia under the scheme. They first went to farm training, then to work on rural properties in New South Wales. And for some, it was really challenging and hard and lonely. However, many went on to have rewarding careers and then stayed permanently in Australia. More than half the migrants went to Skyville, near Pitt Town. At the farm, agricultural skills were taught, and after about 3 months, the boys were sent to any farms in the state requesting labour. The scheme was halted during the First World War, resumed in 1921. In 1930, around the time of the Depression, was halted again. It started up again and completely ceased around 1939. This is a catalogue record for a different, it's a separate collection of the trust, so it's not the association records. This catalogue record is, all the information is completely digitised and you can access it freely via the catalogue. It contains the index to names of boys, plus the registers of boys, plus the registers of ships bringing the boys. And they are not restricted and you can access them freely online. The last set of records we'll look at now are the Big Brother Movement records. The Big Brother Movement archive was officially handed over to the State Library only this year in March. The Movement archive holds numerous personal stories detailing the history of youth migration in New South Wales. The Big Brother Movement, established in London in 1925, was Australia's largest youth migration program, aiding over 12,000 young men with government support to address local employment shortages. The Little Brothers, aged 16 to 20, had mentors known as Big Brothers until they reached 21. So the Little Brothers' personal information within the archive features migration details, employment summaries, and may include birth certificates, references, and application forms. These personal records typically were returned to the Little Brother when they turned 21. Unfortunately, they weren't returned because there was a lack of where they had gone to, their addresses and so forth. The Big Brother movement was one of several non-government organisations involved in immigration to Australia. And in the early years, many of the Little Brothers were recruited via the Dreadnought scheme. The average age of the Little Brothers from the 20s through the 60s was 16. Some were as young as 14 when they migrated. Later arrivals brought to Australia were around 20 years old. The Little Brothers were predominantly employed in rural areas. The Depression halted migration and left many of them stranded without much support. The migration scheme started up again in the late 30s with 5 ships sailing to Australia in 1939. But the outbreak of World War II forced the scheme to be deferred once more. In the years before 1947, Little Brothers arriving in New South Wales were placed on farms after receiving training at the various government-run training farms, including Skyville near Windsor. In 1947, migration started up again, and the movement purchased a 600-acre property known as Carmsley Hills at Bosley Park. By the late 1950s, city work was becoming more common for the boys than farming. In 1951, the movement ran a hostel in Homebush called Gunning House, which provided initial accommodation for up to 30 young men at a time and wishing to work in skilled trades and commerce. So the Big Brother movement scheme stopped in 1983 and the farm was sold. The archival material spanning from the 1920s through to the 1980s encompasses packing lists, suggesting outfits for the boys, along with a wealth of correspondence, photographs and reports. In the next few slides, we will look at the information around restrictions and sensitive collections. As part of conditions when donating collections to the State Library of New South Wales, individuals, families and organisational donors occasionally impose restrictions on access. So it's important to note that these access restrictions are distinct from government privacy laws safeguarding sensitive collections related to birth, death, marriage, health and medical, children in care, prison records, legal records, and personnel records. The guidelines for accessing sensitive collections, so this is the State Library of New South Wales guidelines, are located within the relevant catalogue records. So in the catalogue record, you'll see a link. You open that link and you can download the whole guide. It's got lots of great information. It also has the form, which is called the undertaking with regard to access, commonly referred to as an undertaking. So when you're accessing records that contain personal information about others, we will ask you to sign an undertaking. This is done to protect the privacy of individuals and to prevent the misuse of the information being accessed. The library's collections hold valuable information for researchers, and we are committed to providing free, uncensored and unbiased access to the information. And that's a really good place to start before you start looking or trying to access material. This table has timeframes that have been developed in reference to the relevant New South Wales government agencies. Please note, these periods of restrictions may be in addition to those placed on collection material by donors. This table is in the guide. Also, a reminder that the library has many subscription databases, including Ancestry Library and Find My Past. The Find and Connect web resource, so not only does it have all the information about the different institutions, if you're trying to locate personal records and are not sure where to start your search, or you want some support through the process, we suggest you get in touch with an organisation who can help. And Find and Connect Support Services offers support to care leavers searching for family or wanting to meet and share stories with others with whom they were in care. We also have research guides that have been put together by librarians here at the library. We have lots of newspapers and, of course, the catalogue. So use the catalogue to search for any of the records we have looked at today and much more. Okay, so you will need a special collections library card referred to as a gold card. If you already have a blue library card, visit the special collections area and we will update your card to a special collections one. And if you don't have a card, you can sign up online, but you do need to pick up your gold card in the library. We do need to cite ID. Okay, if you have any questions, so we've got the chat service and the phone service just for short inquiries, but the Ask a Librarian form, this is where if you're wanting to access material, this is your starting point to ask questions and find out how to go about, and we'll step you through every part of the way. One thing I haven't talked about, and I just want to briefly touch on it, we have obviously Indigenous collection. So if you're an Indigenous person looking for your family history, we have an Indigenous engagement unit at the library. So fill in this Ask a Librarian form, and that will be directed to the Indigenous engagement team, and they will help you with access to the records.